Welcome to Curate Your Career, a museum career podcast about staying, leaving, and everything in between. I'm Elin Filbey, museum educator turned career coach.
And I'm Alli, Schell, career coach specifically for museum professionals. And we're here to talk about all the messy, exciting, and sometimes confusing parts of working in museums.
Each week, we'll share stories, real advice, and quick wins to help you figure out your next move, whether that's staying, leaving, or just making your current job work better for you.
So let's dive in, because if there's one thing museum professionals are great at, it's overthinking. We're here to help you think smarter, not spiral. So take a breath and let's get started.
So a few weeks ago, I wrote a LinkedIn post that clearly struck a nerve. It has reached almost 130,000 people. It has been shared over 50 times. And for our little museum corner of the internet, that's pretty significant. The post started with this: Museum pros. If you love working with the stuff, here is a career path outside of museums that you might not have considered. And that path was estate services and personal collections work.
Now, I'm going to jump in real quick and say something about these types of posts that Elin puts out, because she likes to feature different avenues that museum pros can go if they're considering leaving the field. So I want to give you a little credit, Elin, because they're
Thanks.
super helpful. And obviously this one, there are certain ones that I watch in my own little corner that will come across my radar. But that one for sure, I noticed the reaction to that post. And I know you notice which ones resonate, and then I see which ones resonate. And so then Elin and I come together and we're like, ooh, this would make a really great podcast episode. So it was definitely clear that this content, and then our guest that we're going to have on today, definitely has struck some curiosity with our followers and people looking for some other career options and what to do if you are the person that loves to deal with stuff.
Yeah. So I listed roles like estate services coordinator, appraiser, move manager, private archivist. And what resonated was not just the job titles. It was really the idea that, and this is something that I talk about a lot, and I know, Alli, you talk about too, is this idea that our museum skills that we use every day as museum professionals, and in this case, things like inventory, research, stewarding objects, making meaning out of chaos, which is something I hear people love to do, they are so transferable. And there is an entire world outside of museums where those skills are not just relevant, but they are also needed.
So today we're talking with someone who actually made that move. It is Ryan Jelso, who went from being a curator at the Henry Ford to now working in estate sales and appraisal. And we want to hear the full story. We want to know how this works. And we're going to learn too, not just what he does now, but what it felt like to leave, the decision making behind that process. I can only imagine, knowing what I know, and the transfer and all of that. And we're gonna hear it all.
Yeah. So if you've ever thought, I love working with physical objects, I love the stuff, but I need a different context, this episode is for you. So Ryan, welcome to Curate Your Career.
Woo!
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So Ryan, we're going to have you do a quick introduction of yourself and what you were doing in the museum world and what you're doing now before we launch into our questions. Sound good?
Awesome. Perfect. Thank you again for having me. Again, that post is something I really resonated with, even though I had moved on already. It's just something that spoke to me. And again, I am happy to be here and sort of lend my experience or experiences to sort of help other people navigate that. But yeah, I'm Ryan Jelso. I'm a certified appraiser and an estate sale consultant at Poof Estate Services based out of Ferndale, Michigan.
So if people only know you from your museum days,
Mm-hmm.
how would you describe what you're doing now?
That's a great question. And I forgot, right before I stopped there, I had been an associate curator at the Henry Ford. I specifically worked on digital content there. I did that for about 8 years. And previously to that, I had worked also at the Henry Ford in their Benson Ford Research Center, which is just the public facing aspect of their archive and library. So I was a research support specialist there before I was a curator. So I sort of had a whole experience of different kinds of objects, whether that be paper through the archive and then actual 3D objects through the museum. But yeah, now again, as an estate sale consultant at Proof Estate Services, a lot of my time is going out and meeting with prospective clients who are looking to either downsize their home or help sort of move on from a home that a loved one has left behind, and sort of what are we doing with the assets in that home? Sort of what's the next step for them? And we would love to find those assets a new home. And so I come out, walk them through sort of the processes that we have in place at Poof on how we sort of help our clients navigate this period. And then again, I'm sort of that other aspect of being a certified appraiser. I can sort of help traditionally appraise objects if we're not trying to move on from them. But yeah, it's a very in-depth process. I'm excited to talk about it a little bit more.
Tell us about your education and kind of like your process
Yeah.
through Henry Ford.
Yeah, I mean, I can start back as far back as my teenage years, I would say. So I, as a teenager, I worked in a library as a page. So I had already been sort of exposed to, again, sort of the library archive aspect that you can find in museum work. In college, I majored in anthropology, specifically anthropology, and I also majored in environmental science. I couldn't really separate my interest between those two. I actually find it really funny now. It's really a great marriage of both of my degrees. I'm trying to sort of, again, a lot of the work I'm doing now is trying to sort of help objects avoid the landfill in a sense. It's really about secondhand shopping and sort of extending the life of an object that's already been created. So I actually am, it's just been in the past sort of 6 months that I've realized it's sort of been an even greater combination of my original interest. But yeah, in college, I was an anthropology, major with an archaeology specialist or specialty. I didn't sort of buy into the whole grad school journey. I had a great mentors, I would say, as undergrad from other graduate students I was working with that sort of let me in on the idea that, if you're not really committed to this, do not go down this path because you will regret the time that you've spent doing so. So I took that to heart, and I really thought about it. And, at the end of the day, following sort of a traditional archaeology path, going through grad school, going through a PhD program wasn't something that I had really, I wasn't really on board with. So I sort of just left after, obtaining both my degrees and started just exploring locally. Again, I'm based out of Metro Detroit. I went to Michigan State University, so I started exploring sort of the local scene in terms of museum opportunities. I knew I wanted to go into museums. That was something I was passionate about. I had a lot of museum experience from my undergrad. Just so happened to be able to start working at the Henry Ford. Henry Ford's a large institution. It's one of the largest institutions in the Metro Detroit area. It has a long history, and it employs a lot of history professionals, within, again, that Metro Detroit area. So got my foot in the door there. And, once I was there, I sort of made the most of the opportunities that were presenting themselves to me.
There was a big digitization
Yes.
project
Yeah.
you were working in. Yeah,
Yep.
can you talk about
Again,
that?
so yeah, I was an associate curator there. Again, thinking back on my museum career, this is back in roughly 2015, I would say. So in 2015, the museum there was making a big push at sort of the digital realm. So again, expanding website offerings, expanding what the digital footprint looks like on the physical museum floor. Again, they were in need of people that could come in and be generalists. So again, you think of a traditional curator, they're really, really sort of built to be specialists. They have specialty interests, they have specialty knowledge in certain areas. What this digital content push needed was generalists that could come in and sort of work with the specialists and work within the Henry Ford's collection to sort of pull these stories out and turn them in content that could be consumed, on the back end, whether that's by a guest, physically on the museum floor or again, over the web. So again, we're structuring a new sort of digital department there at the Henry Ford that again included about 4 specialists. Wow, sorry, 4 specialists, getting hung up on my words here. 4 specialists that worked with the curatorial staff on sort of mining, I would say, is a good descriptor of what the work we did was, sort of mining the connection or the collection for these stories that could be turned into digital content.
What did you love about curatorial work?
Yeah, so curatorial work, to me, what I resonated with it in terms of the Henry Ford's collection, I think it's, again, sort of it's different for every institution, and it's different for the person itself. Within that Henry Ford collection, it was sort of an untapped reservoir, I would say, of American history stories that haven't been part of the traditional narrative of American history. So there was opportunity to get in there and do a lot of meaningful work and bring a lot of untold stories to light. And that's sort of what I really enjoyed, the research aspect, the writing aspect. Again, the curators I worked, again, were all very knowledgeable. They had decades of experience, some of them, within the Henry Ford's collection itself. Again, the work was really rewarding in the sense of being able to pull those stories out and sort of breathe life into them and give them an audience.
And if anybody is not familiar with Henry Ford or hasn't been there, it is like the
It's overwhelming.
scale, yeah, like you just really can't wrap your head around the scale of it. And it kind of reminds me of similar to like Air and Space, where the physicality of the collection is huge. Like we took our kids there over the winter, and just like hundreds of cars and trains, and like it is just like the scale is it's so massive. So it's really, really cool place. You'll get your steps in there for sure. I'm sure you did a lot of walking.
Oh yeah. I tried to get out every lunch, at least, lunch period, and get out and sort of take a walk around the museum or a storage area. It is sort of mind blowing walking through the space. You have very large trains inside. And massive sort of steam engines that are built into the floor itself. And our storage there was also just as expansive. I think the stat that we like to say was, I believe it was like 5% or less is what's on display. And it's already a massive amount of what's on display. But yeah, it's always interesting because I was there every day, and you sort of become immune to what's in front of you. You're used to it. You see this all the time. And it takes talking to other people to realize, okay, this is a very special place with, just the magnitude of, items that are here.
You definitely take it for granted.
Yeah.
Because you're like, oh yeah, there's this gigantic train here that I see every day. Like, of course, it's just on the way to the bathroom, like whatever. Yeah, it's a really cool spot. And I think this is where a lot of people hit this idea of vocational and but I'm at my dream institution, or I'm at my dream job. When this discontentment starts to creep in, and it feels sticky and icky, I think, a lot of times for people. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about when you started to feel like this might not be the path that you wanted to continue down.
Yeah. Of course, when I started there initially, I was very excited to sort of learn about the collection, dive into it. And this is before I was in my curatorial role. So just as a research support specialist working within the collection, like I said earlier, the work is what sort of drew that excitement out of me. It gave me a purpose. With any work, you can have your ups and your downs. It's a roller coaster. I feel like it's very rare where that's not happening, or at least maybe you're not sort of looking at the full picture if you're not experiencing the downs. But the more I experienced there, the more I learned. Every institution has its structures in place of how they do things. A workplace culture can be good, culture can be bad. It's, no place is immune to that. It's, again, sort of the tolerance you have for the bad aspects of that, and sort of how that affects you, and sort of your drive, and sort of what you're projecting out as your future at a place. So yeah, again, the more I experienced there, the more I did, the more I sort of ran into, again, these cultural structures that were, sort of blocks for me personally, things that, I don't think I could necessarily sort of work through, or if I saw myself here long term, things I necessarily had, that high of a tolerance for. And that's, again, you're sort of thinking of, I have this great opportunity in front of me. I don't want to squander it. I don't want to be thinking sort of these thoughts of like, maybe this isn't the right fit. Initially, when you have that thought, I feel like it's very scary. You're like, I'm meant to be here. I'm meant to have a long career here. I'm meant to do this work. And now I'm questioning it. Sort of, why am I questioning it? What's wrong with me, in a sense? Like, again, it's, I think, very challenging. I'm trying my best to articulate it. I've reflected a lot about it, but getting it out in words is a different sort of process than just reflecting on it internally with your own thoughts. But yeah, it sort of built up. The pandemic intersected my time at the Henry Ford. That certainly didn't help. I think the museum industry as a whole went through a lot of challenges at that point. Again, you're sort of ripping sort of the crux of what a museum is in terms of physical experience out. So again, with the pandemic and sort of these feelings that I had sort of growing, um, it just sort of led to a breaking point for me where I probably held on too long, in all honesty. I didn't sort of call it earlier and sort of make my way out, in a way that I felt was probably healthier. I held on too long because I was scared, and I was scared to leave. I didn't want to throw the opportunity away. But then again, if my morale is lowering, what am I really contributing? I have to be able to have high morale in order to contribute and feel purposeful in the work I'm doing. So yeah, it eventually led to me leaving the Henry Ford, and sort of exploring a new career path.
And I think what you are saying and the questions that you had internally will resonate with so many people listening to this. And I think even just this thought process is even helpful for people that aren't considering leaving the field, but considering another job. Like I was thinking about my time where I landed what I thought was my dream job and then realized it was not a good fit. And it's just that's a hard realization to have.
Yes.
Whether you're
Yeah.
staying in the field or not, you cycle through all the feelings
Hmm.
and it's tough. So holding space for that because that's like mental resiliency during that process and then knowing how hard it is to get a job in this field. And then I can't imagine. I mean, I can't imagine what it is in terms of maybe starting to express this to other people or when you started to make that pathway out and telling them like, hey, I'm leaving or I have left. And I don't know if you got like pushback or in terms of just like going from having that identity of curator, which like is kind of one of the neat parts of working in a museum is getting to
Hmm.
say you work in a museum, that you hold this title at certain museums, and now you're shifting. So can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, no, I think the identity part, you're hitting on a real important part of all of this. I had really integrated that into my identity, over my, 8 years of being an associate curator at the Henry Ford. It was really important to me. And, starting to feel discontentment, really clashed with that. It was like I built up this aspect of me and I don't want to part with it. So it was sort of almost a grieving process, 2 years in the making. Like I said, I could have done this probably more like in a healthier way, but it took me 2 years to get to the point where it's like I'm just again not able to contribute in the ways that I know that I could in the past, and it's time for a change. Again, holding on wasn't the best route for me. I would suggest, if you're experiencing similar thoughts or you're in sort of a similar situation, to really set aside the time to let yourself mentally process it and sort of make the step sooner rather than later. The fact that you're having these thoughts, it's not a negative. It means that your mind's telling you something, like you're telling yourself something. You sort of have to explore what that is. Yeah, again, that identity aspect was a very challenging part of all this, and why I hung on so long. It's because I didn't want to give that up, and I didn't know, again, sort of what my life would look like without that aspect of my identity in it. But yeah, not to say that there's other opportunities out there. That's why I'm here to talk about that.
Yeah. No, and thanks for being so honest about that because I think from my perspective of working with people who have gotten to the point where they're like, I want to leave the field, there's like these stages of grief almost that people have to go through of,
Mhm.
anger and acceptance. And it's hard because like you said, your identity is really based around this. And I remember you shared with me in our pre-recording chat about you were an Antiques Roadshow fan, which,
Yes.
is
Yeah,
where
yeah.
so many of our lore
Uh-huh.
started, right? And so it's like this has just kind of been baked into you
Yep.
as a part of you for a long time. And it's hard to walk away from that or to shift. And I think walking away maybe isn't even the right way to think about it, but of just like to shift. How does that look? How is it showing up in your life? How is it a part of your identity still?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I've watched Antiques Roadshow probably since I was like 5 years old. So I've always been a huge fan of that. It's really influenced, obviously my life based on, the journey I've taken so far. But I didn't really realize till I left just how much my work style clashed with what I was doing at the museum. It was a traditional, I would say, office job. You're sitting at a cubicle, you're on a computer, you're researching, you're writing, you're staring at a screen or a book. There is the phenomenal aspect of being able to go into an archive or go into storage to do sort of hands-on research, I would say. My job now, I'm out and about 10 to 15 different houses a week. I'm meeting all different people. I'm, seeing all different kinds of objects, from all different ages in history. And I realized, how I work is, through that more physical aspect. I have a harder time sitting and doing the writing work and the research work. I was really capable of doing that, but towards the end, without a purpose, it was really challenging for me. And the work I'm doing now, again, it sort of fits more into how I exert my energy. I don't know how to describe this. I'm doing my best to sort of describe the differences in work styles that I've experienced so far. And again, it took me experiencing this whole new, aspect to realize, oh yeah, that was a huge problem for me. Like that's an aspect of why I was struggling, was because I didn't want to sit and just, I wanted to get out on the museum floor, walk around, see guests interacting with things. Like that was an aspect that I really enjoyed at the museum. But yeah, now this work, I get all of that, and it's sort of making up a majority of the work that I'm doing.
And I think people get so enticed by working in a place that has subject matter that we're interested in,
Hmm.
or like the title of the place, and then it's like digging down deeper into like, actually, what are we looking for from a workplace? That was a hard lesson I had to learn. And similar to you, right? When I thought I landed my dream job, I was in meetings a lot of the day and then like had just like sit down work time. I realized why like small museums work better for me, because I was up and moving all the time. Like I'm
Hmm.
just someone and I need just different structures to my day. So that's just a good thing for people, whether they're moving on or considering other things in the field, or if you're like, this job doesn't feel right. Going down into the details, I think, is really
Hmm.
important. So I'm really glad you had that realization to then help you not get stuck in a similar type role, even if you were
Yes.
leaving the
Elsewhere.
field.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's that self-reflection part you're talking about that I think people don't really spend enough time doing, of like, okay, I don't like this, but why? Why? Um, and a question I always ask my people is, what do you want to do more of in your next role? And it sounds like you wanted more of that interaction and that dynamic environment, and
Hmm.
not just sitting at a computer all day. And you were able to find it through this new role.
Yeah. Yes.
So let's talk now about your pivot. I would love to
Hmm.
hear about how estate sales and estate services and appraisal, how tell us the origin story. How did this all enter your life and your work?
Yeah. Yeah. So it really started sort of with my father-in-law. So he is a retired auto engineer, and he retired a number of years ago now, probably 10 or 15. And he was looking for a change of pace in his own career, and he actually again launched his own eBay store. So again, one of those earlier eBay sellers. Again, you need to source things for your store. So he would frequent a lot of estate sales, flea markets, anywhere you could buy secondhand goods. Their bread and butter. That's how those sort of eBay stores work in the sense of reselling. When I first met him, I always really liked that aspect about him. And then I started going out with him a lot. So, we went out, and, it was really fun for me because it was a different experience than I was getting at the museum. At the museum, I was seeing objects, but now I was seeing, just a volume of objects.
In the
And it
wild.
Yes, in the wild, yes. That's the exciting part. Yes, that is a very good point that I, haven't even thought of. Yes, in the wild is way different than seeing it on a storage shelf in
If
like an archival environment or something like that.
if I was working your job, Ryan, in my head, I'd be like, I'm actually on a TV show right now.
Yeah. Thinking about Antiques Roadshow, again, growing up, American Pickers was definitely a huge influence. Pawn Stars, I would say, that is also in my wheelhouse now. I watched it growing up. That's sort of related to the work I do now. But yeah, American Pickers is another big one that I always enjoyed really, really watching. But yeah, so again, I would go out with him a lot more. And I started having thoughts again, but even when I was early on not early on, but in my museum career, I was like, this is interesting to me. Like, it's intriguing. What would it look like if I did this? As I sort of had my morale decline towards the end of my museum career, I started talking to sort of my close friends and coworkers. I had a few close coworkers at the museum who I, consider friends. And I started talking to them like, would it be crazy if I just left and did this. To me, I was starting to voice it, like trying to, put it out and just get feedback. And, they were always very supportive. I didn't really articulate it to anyone else except sort of my close group. And they're like, basically, if it makes you happy, that's something to think about. Again, we're all having sort of similar experiences in that museum environment. So they understood what I was feeling and where I was coming from. And they could see sort of potential for me, as I was describing it. It didn't take it took me, I would say, almost hitting rock bottom sort of and leaving my museum career to really consider it. I really started taking it seriously after I left. And, that's a whole nother story that we can get into. I sort of want to pause here because I could keep going, but that's sort of the journey that I took with it.
Yeah. And so you were working with your father-in-law doing some reselling, and then you had your own reselling too, right?
Yeah. So again, always looking to supplement my own income as a museum
It's a museum
professional.
problem, right?
Yes.
Oh,
It was something that I had taken on, with his guidance initially, and then I sort of started doing it on my own. So it's,
yeah.
at this point, I don't really have the time, because I'm very busy with what I do at the moment. But with the more structured museum schedule, I was in the office, again, Monday through Friday. We were working remote during the pandemic, but then on the weekend I could go out. Now it's again pretty much all of my time is spent in these environments. So my reselling has quieted down. But yeah, that's another sort of influence on it that was again part of my journey.
Yeah. And so then how did you come so you were experiencing this tangentially, you're like, "Oh, I like them kind of picking up as a side hustle." Like
hmm
what helped you make that shift from side hustle interest to okay, this is a viable career?
Yeah, I would say I had been out and I sort of understood the industry a little bit better. Sort of got a lay of the land. I knew some of the sort of bigger players within the estate sale industry, especially within Metro Detroit. There was one company that I went to who I thought was just doing it, completely different than everybody else. Estate sales can be very traditional. Someone bringing in sort of a new eye on how things can be done and sort of modernizing their approach and sort of how to go about it um, stands out against sort of the backdrop of all the other companies out there doing this work. And so the company I work for now happens to be that company that is sort of standing out and doing it differently. And I think sort of modernizing the approach and sort of going about it in a really, really unique and sort of interesting way that resonated with me. So again, for me, it was just happening, I just happened to be at one of their sales and I went and I crossed paths with the owner and I asked her if she, needed help. And I sort of explained to her a little bit really quickly what my background was. And that sort of started off that relationship. And so we started talking more. And then she brought me on and sort of the rest is history. And I have been with them now since 2024. But
Wow.
yeah, it's interesting. Estate sales happen across the country. There's an app/website called estatesales.net. You have secondhand shoppers who watch you and aren't familiar with, how to navigate the scene, but that will show you pretty much all the estate sales happening. And every major, metropolitan area has a scene going on. So I would urge people to check it out if it's of interest to you, even if you don't want to sort of leave your museum career. But it's very exciting industry to be in.
Yes. Okay, and so I want to dial in a little bit more on something you mentioned, and this is something Alli and I tell people all the time is just talk to people.
Mhm.
Ask them questions about their jobs. Do you need help? Tell me more. And I think sometimes people are like, it's not that simple, but like it is that simple. So tell me more about how you got involved with Poof and like how that relationship started. Cause I think that is a really valuable insight for people.
Yeah, like I said, I started as a shopper with them, and I started as, like, just experiencing their sales. So, again, like I said, it was me noticing there's a difference here between the other sales that I'm going to. They sell or we sell online, I should say we. I represent the company at the moment. So we sell online, and that's a huge sort of difference maker in that industry. Not a lot of other companies are doing that. We ship across the country. But yeah, again, it's just sort of voicing, again, your interests. It's pretty simple in that sense. Before I started working there, I would say, sort of more modest about my interests. I would do it via email or via, sort of reaching out via the web somehow. I wasn't getting out and making that in-person connection or picking up the phone even and making a call. Like a call can make a huge difference as well. But there is a difference there I found between the web. On the web, on the internet, you can just be one of thousands of voices and just another email in an inbox. But, trying to actually make that, face-to-face connection, or at least, voice to voice, I'd say, via the phone, it's a huge difference maker.
And to articulate to everyone, like to take your tips like that you personally used and then just like broaden them for people and how they can kind of use them, right? So you did your research, right? So you clearly
Yep.
knew that like this is a key player in the field. This is what they're doing differently. And so like if you're going to approach someone or looking to look into a different industry or even different type of job or whatever it is, do your research first. So that you have some good points to make when you like, and it's authentic, right? So like you're coming with like genuine points.
Yep.
And
those are all great points that you're making. Again, authenticity is a huge part of this. And again, obviously as a museum professional, I come from a heavy research background, so I'm not going to make a decision without doing that research.
We love a deep dive.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, the rabbit hole, as I was always prone to getting wrapped into during my museum career, was a running joke for my coworkers and I, getting trapped in the rabbit hole, let's say. But yeah, doing the research, again, really learning what the industry looks like that you want to switch to, and then sort of making a conscientious effort to direct who you're reaching out to. Because it does come off as authentic if you're doing all of that.
Yeah, and then going in person or like reaching out physically, like via phone call or like going to the actual thing. Like, sure, yeah, emails are fine and certainly like they can have their own traction. But I think sometimes too, it's like going out to the place and seeing what can happen is another great piece of advice from your situation. So, hey, and it worked for you. So that's amazing.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Or even like using online as a starting point. But it reminds me of like dating apps when you're like trying to get off the apps as quickly as possible. You're like, hey, are you free for a drink? Like you can start online, but try and move it to in person or to a phone call.
Yeah.
So that you can build that connection.
I get that it's hard.
Yeah.
If you're, looking across the country, let's say, or you're looking in a different, metropolitan area. I get that it's hard in that aspect, but I would just plan a vacation somewhere and then, go there and try and reach out. That sounds like terrible advice, but I have done that before in the past. Even before I started my museum career, I've done that exact thing, and it opened a few doors for me, but it's always something that you can, sort of keep in your back pocket if you.
Yeah, for sure. It's 100 people can send an email, but it takes somebody, and you're going to stand out in a really positive way if you're the person that makes the effort to get together in person or on the phone or whatever. Like,
and just like the follow up, and I get people are worried about, I worry about it like being too aggressive or too annoying, but you want to, I don't think expressing your interest multiple times and, in terms of a follow up is necessarily being that aggressive. It just shows that you're committed to sort of making this connection.
Yep. Squeaky wheel gets the oil.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I'm wondering so now, you're working for Poof now. And what skills from your museum work transferred immediately? And then as time went on, what skills started to bubble up of like, oh, this is a museum skill?
Yeah, I think, coming from my background as a generalist, thinking in the sense of a curatorial role, being able to sort of put myself in any sort of subject matter and, becoming a subject matter expert on sort of a short turnaround, that is, again, a skill that I think a lot of museum professionals have, and it's very applicable to what I do now. Again, I'm seeing thousands and thousands and thousands of different objects in homes, all with different histories. Being able to sort of jump in there and begin to understand sort of what the object is just in general, and then also what a market is for that object. And that's where that generalist sort of specialty comes into play. Again, part of this is digital literacy. And I spoke about this back during my museum career, to people that were interested, in coming to the museum to work, in the field. But, again, digital literacy is especially in today's age, is, a huge sort of check in the positive column for museum professionals. I think we're all pretty adept at navigating, the web and sort of navigating sources. and sort of being able to, you know, tease information or, judge information and sort of bring that all together in a decision-making process. It's, again, something that I use every day. Over the course of my time, I would say sort of my background just in general has come in handy when talking to people. I think it's, again, a sense of trust that people have with me. I'm not someone off the street coming into their house and saying like, I'm gonna sell all your stuff for you. I come with sort of a background and a pedigree, I'd say, in what I'm doing. And that resonates a lot with people. So just the fact that it's on my work history is a huge plus when I'm talking to potential clients of mine. They love knowing that I was an expert before I became an expert in this, in that sense. But yeah.
And
Yeah.
you,
Go ahead, Alli.
when you were interviewing for this role, or if you've gotten a chance to speak to like your supervisors afterwards,
Mhm.
was there anything that, and it could be the same things as what you were talking about, was there anything in particular that stuck out to them that they were like, oh, we really need to hire you from your museum skills?
Yeah, I think another big part of this is lens. So that's part of all of this. As a museum professional, you're developing a lens. Even as like a reseller, you're developing a lens. They're two different lenses, but you're still developing them. In my case, I've merged them now, but you're becoming more familiar with everyday objects, physical objects, even archival documents. Again, that lens is something that I am continually developing, but I think that's what really resonated with the owners of Poof when I talked with them, was that I have this lens and I am able to build on it. I know what I'm looking at. If I don't know what I'm looking at, I'm able to find out what I'm looking at and do it sort of in a thorough manner so I can speak from expertise on it. But yeah, again, if people are secondhand shopping, you're already developing that lens. It's just, I keep saying lens, but it is sort of the big important thing. I use it as an appraiser also, in the appraisal work that I do. Again, being able to sort of, again, like I said, know what I'm looking at. And if I don't know, at least know where to find the information is a huge, huge plus.
Yeah. And especially with the audience that you're working with, being able to say, I was a curator at the Henry Ford, that's like, oh,
Mhm.
okay.
Yep.
Like that, like you said, that carries a level of pedigree to it that I think sometimes we take for granted in the field, that
Mhm.
with certain audiences, the knowledge base and the title does carry a lot of weight. And that's something that you can certainly use to your advantage.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So where are you finding satisfaction now in your job? So now that you can still throw around curator title, you can still be around the
Yeah.
objects.
Yep.
What drives your passion now? Because I think people fear. Sorry, I feel like people fear that when they leave the fields,
Yeah.
that we're going to lose that, and that's not always the case.
Yeah. I think, part of it for me is empathy, working with people in difficult situations. The situations that I come into are very overwhelming for families. They sort of, you can be left with sort of any state of property. So property can be in any state, from a hoarding situation to, there's minimal left in, the home. So no matter what state of the property, and it's usually stressful for the family. And coming in and being able to sort of give them a vision and being able to say, I can help you and this is how I can help you. I'm here to sort of take this off your shoulders and sort of, again, recoup some of the value out of what's here. So this is actually a worthwhile experience for you. That's really what sort of resonates with me in this sense. Again, another part of this is sort of just the differences in the companies. So again, I worked for a not-for-profit before. Again, it's a larger institution, so it's better off, but I am working for a for-profit company now. Inherently, there are going to be differences at the end of the day. With me, I see, in this sense, more upward potential with the company I'm at right now. Especially, I really like sort of the startup feel. It's a smaller company. We have about 20 employees. If there's a problem, we can sort of address that problem really quickly and move on. In those larger not-for-profit, sort of institutions, you can have a problem and not address it for 6 months to a year. I think that's what I found frustrating when I worked there, was just that, that sort of time scale. So again, that's another really rewarding aspect of this, is just, again, just the upward potential I feel that the company has and that I am, part of building that.
Yeah, that's definitely something I hear from a lot of people who are thinking about leaving and I felt it myself of like, I don't want to be an executive director. Salary is not going to increase. My title, I've hit the ceiling of the title that I want to hit. Like,
Yep,
where do I go from here?
exactly. Oh,
It's cool, like in a startup feel that you're building things, you're seeing things manifest on a faster timeline
mhm.
versus writing a label, waiting for the exhibit to get designed, then seeing somebody enjoy it versus I'm sure your timeline's much faster now.
Yep, and you described it perfectly. Those are
Yeah,
the same thoughts that I had. So
yeah,
it's like,
yeah.
what is that upper limit if I don't want to move on from doing what I'm doing here? It's again, it gives you a little bit more of a motivational boost, I would say. Everybody's different again. If that's something that you're setting out to sort of achieve with your career, by all means do that. Again, but we're all different. So, yeah, speaking to the people that again want to explore, again, a different path.
Yeah, and I think too, like if we're being frank, just like making more money.
That's what I feel like in the museum world,
Mhm.
at least I was guilty of it. Money can always be like a hush hush kind of conversation. Not something that you have. For me, it's always thinking about all things we want to do as a museum. We need money to do those. Not thinking about myself, thinking about the sort of the greater good of the museum, message. But yeah, for in a for-profit company, that's a lot different. You can have, you can contribute and build the company and have it be reflected in your salary.
It's okay to want money. I feel like we
Yes,
have
Yes.
to
I
release
know.
that as a
Yes, yeah,
field. It's so hard.
Yes. Yes.
I 100% like right there with you, Ryan. Like it's so
yeah.
hard to not shake that mindset.
Yeah, it is. It really is. But you got to force yourself to. Yeah, that's what I had to do. It was hard for
Mhm.
me, but I just forced
Mhm.
you have to, give yourself more credit and just, you're worth more potentially somewhere else. Just the truth.
Yep. Yep. I think a lot of times we pay for the opportunity to work at a museum versus them paying for us to
Yeah.
work there.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
100%.
Ugh. Well, Ryan, I'm wondering what skills from your experience now and this perspective of leaving having been in the field for a while and now leaving, looking back, what skills do you think museum professionals undervalue the most?
I th- At least for me, when I was at the museum and working on a project, let's say, I was working with people from across sort of different fields. So I was looking at a whole picture. There's exhibit design, there's label writing, there's, the tech people, there's the marketing people who want, to market this. Again, there's different levels. So me as associate curator working with, a higher level person on what their vision for this project for the museum is. I think we're really adept at sort of seeing the whole, at least considering the whole when going about something. And I do think that benefits me greatly now. I am able to, again, walk into a situation and sort of understand what the end goals are for everyone involved and sort of make informed decisions on sort of, or informed decisions based on that. So again, there's just, I feel like in the museum field, there's so many different professions that you come across, at least within a larger institution as myself. If you're in a smaller institution, then you're probably wearing those hats in the role already. So you have that experience. But yeah, again, seeing that end goal and sort of seeing what it means to different people in the process.
Totally. And then if somebody was thinking about leaving the museum field, what would you tell them? What advice would you give them?
Yeah, I would say definitely don't undervalue yourself. Again, I feel like that's a message you guys have probably been, articulating to your listeners already, but it's a lesson I really had to learn the hard way. I was afraid of leaving. I had made a lot of personal connections at the museum. I was afraid of severing those personal connections. I was sort of unable to separate, again, my identity and sort of those, again, personal relationships from the job aspect of the museum that I was at. So I would definitely compartmentalize a little bit more, not sort of I'm not saying you can't have relationships with your coworkers and be friendly and like talk, but it's just, making sure you're looking out for yourself and you're valuing yourself and you're sort of exploring an industry that's going to reflect that back to you, that values you, feel like you can thrive in that situation. I don't know if that's the right answer.
Yeah.
I guess there's no right answer, but I'm hoping I articulated that clearly.
Yeah, you did. And there's no wrong answer either. I think, yeah, it's that identity component is always, I think, the trickiest.
Yeah. But again, there's so many more opportunities out there that you can sort of take that identity and fit it into. Again, I was just so sort of blinded, like the horse blinders, just like looking forward, like, I have to make this work. How am I going to make this work? I don't feel like I can make this work. What am I going to do if I can't make this work? It sort of took me, going really, again, like I said, to the rock bottom of it to figure out, like, okay, just take the blinders off and sort of start thinking about this more creatively and sort of thinking about what drives me and sort of what my passions are.
Yeah, and I think that ties in with, you said something earlier about making this choice and making this decision and thinking about this while you have a choice and while you have the space and not when you're forced. Can you expand upon that a little bit?
Yeah, I think if you're beginning to have these thoughts, like I said earlier, I'd rather you explore them right at the moment than sort of holding on and hoping things are going to change or something's coming around the corner or there's not like a magic wand where you can wave it and suddenly the structural problems at the institution that you're at don't have any effect on the workflows that go on there. It takes a lot of hard work, I'd say, for those changes to take place. And if you don't want to be around for that, then you got to start exploring your options. It's just you waited too long. I keep saying that, but I had an opportunity like early on when I started experiencing these thoughts and feelings to start exploring that. And I didn't. I feel like again in reflection, didn't explore them quick enough to me. Sort of let it linger, or I let it linger. I let it affect sort of how I felt mentally. It wasn't good for me. I would have done myself a huge favor if I had went down the route sooner rather than later. And again, you can go down the route and then you can learn from that experience and say like, actually, maybe I do think staying in this field or finding a different opportunity in the museum field is actually what I want because now I've explored this and it doesn't actually resonate with me the way I thought it would.
Elin and I like to call it the love it or list it model.
Yeah. That's a great way to describe it.
Like either is there a way you can approve it in your own way or move on.
Yeah.
Get the bigger house. But just real quick to go off a point that it just was reminding me of a quote someone said to me once, a toxic, or even I could just even say mismatch, because yours might not have been a toxic situation, but a toxic workplace will change you before it changes.
Yes.
And
I would say that.
And I'm always like, same with your situation too, where people will hold on for too long and it obviously like affected you negatively in so many, different ways. But, I feel like there's this.
And it just affected the quality of my work.
Yeah.
And that was something that I'd always stood by, earlier on. And it's like, I'm not able to do this at the same level that I know I can. And I don't think I necessarily can get back to that level in this current situation. And I had to admit that to myself. And there's nothing wrong with admitting,
Is
you
not a
can't
failure.
take something on. Yeah. I think that
not
was
a failure.
a big component of it too, was just like the F word, the failure word. Yeah. Yeah. It's just like not using that to describe your experience so far because you have had an experience and grown and you can take that and go somewhere with it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think this is a plug also for our first episode of this podcast. Listen to this before you rage quit your museum job, because I think
Love
a
that.
lot of it's iconic. It's great.
Yeah.
But I think what happens a lot is people will come to me and they've rage quit their museum job, or they come to Alli and they've rage quit their job and they're like, I need help. And it's like, okay, we can help you, obviously, but it's always easier to get a job when you have a job. And we're big advocates for giving yourself that runway, like you're talking about, of having the space to explore things when it's very low stakes and when you're not feeling pressured or where you're not feeling desperate.
Yep. And the pressure and the desperation is really what sort of got me at the end. And that's, again, just more to your point, do not wait for those to set in. You can go down the path before.
How long has it been since you worked in a museum, Ryan?
Almost 2 years.
So almost 2 years.
Yeah, 2 years.
So Elin always makes the point too that working with her when you're going down this path, you don't necessarily have to leave museums permanently. You can always go back.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts now? 2 years in, leaving the field, would you ever go back? Do you miss them? And if you, and I'm sure there are, if you do, aspects of museum work that you miss.
Yes, that's a great question. It's a question I think about a lot, actually. Right now, I'm early on into this sort of second act. So, would I ever go back? After I'm done exploring the second act, I guess I would consider that, just because I had such a connection, again, with my coworkers and the work I was doing there. So, I really enjoyed that aspect of it. I think the thing I miss about museums is being on, I call it like shifting the paradigm, but you're educating the public. That's what you get into museums to do. Like that's meaningful work. You're changing the narrative on, whatever subject you're working on. You're writing new labels. Those labels are going out, they're being read. That I think is not something that's, acknowledged as much in terms of how important it is. We're out there again influencing the public's opinion on these sort of subject matters, whatever subject matter it may be. And I miss that work. I miss, you know, sort of that grand idea of it. Again, we've gone over sort of already sort of the aspects that I don't miss, or at least, the aspects I enjoy of what I'm doing now. So I don't really have I guess a concise answer for that specifically. But yeah, I do miss it in that sense. But, I'm really content and happy with where I'm at now. So it's a question I try not to, reflect on too much just because I know where I've come from and where I'm going. So yeah.
Well, and I think too, you're building a lot of good skills. Maybe you were jumping in to say this, Elin, that if you did want to come back into museum work, full circle, right? Like a
Yeah.
lot of the stuff is transferable back in. I think you've also learned a lot about yourself through the process. So, like, even if you were to go back, like, I think you'd be better about setting boundaries and finding the right
Yes.
role for sure.
Yeah. Exactly.
But then, to your credit too, like you were saying earlier, you were inspiring people in a different way in terms of like helping them through tough times. And so
Hmm.
it's a different level of working with the public, but still really meaningful. And
Yeah.
there's value in that too.
I still get really excited. Like I was always excited, in stores just because again, the collection's so massive there, you're seeing something new every day. And I get just as excited now when I go into someone's home and I haven't seen something that that they have there. There's still that sort of same excitement for the material culture that's finding its sort of way through both of my careers right now.
So, if somebody has been listening to this episode and they're like, this
Hmm.
sounds really cool, this could be a great pivot for me, what advice, insights, takeaways do you have for people as they want to explore this career path?
Yeah, that's a great question. I know it's sort of a different one. Oh, it's not, I would say, that common. That's why, again, I loved your post so much originally because I was like, this is something more people need to know about. Like, always am, talking to my clients about this sort of transition period we're in generationally. So we're moving on from a baby boomer generation. They're getting older, and the generations that preceded them, they're handing down a massive amount of wealth, and that wealth isn't just in, like homes and, you know, stocks and things like that. It's in actual objects. There's a huge amount of wealth in objects that are being transferred down, and those things need to find second, third lives. It's a huge, again, going back to my environmental science degree, it's a huge concern in that sense, you know, about sort of making secondhand and thrifting a larger component of our culture, at least in the United States. So, I do think it's a industry that's going to see a lot of expansion, especially in the next few decades here. If I was to explore this, again, I would go down the path that I did. You can start local and start exploring again the companies that are doing this kind of work. You know, I'm really lucky that I'm at a company that does appraisal work and we do estate sale services. So, I get to do both. There are companies, that strictly do sort of just appraisals, appraisal work. I think that's something anyone in the museum field could find, you know, a next step in. There's also auction companies out there. So estate auctions, they tend to, do their services either on site or online, but there's that whole component of this industry as well. And then there's also, those larger traditional auction services. So like art auctions. So again, I don't have to go into those. That's Christie's, Bonham's, some of those big players in the field there. But that's something that's sort of related to what I'm doing as well. But yeah, there's just, it's multifaceted and it's going to be growing a lot, I think, in the next few decades, like I said.
Yeah, definitely. And that's when I do those posts about these alternative careers, I always try and pick career paths that have data that show that they're growing. And as you alluded to, Ryan, there's what are they calling it? The great wealth
Yes, I can't think.
something.
Yes, I know what you're talking. Well, I know what you're speaking of,
The
but I
great
can't
wealth
remember
transfer, I think it's called.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
something like
And
that.
so, yeah, as boomers are downsizing or passing or, their stuff needs a place to go. And this is a field that I think is going to be growing by leaps and bounds. And especially if museum people can get in
Mm-hmm.
and impact in a positive way of how we are stewards of material culture and stewards of our stories. I
And
think
it's
it can
great.
make a difference.
I
Yeah.
just, when you were talking, I just remembered I still haven't severed my connections to my museum. I say my museum, but the museum that I worked at.
Yeah.
They're active collectors. There was an instance this past summer where a home that I was working in, he was the client's father was a mid-century modern designer, and he had worked with Martin Luther King on the Selma to Montgomery marches, and there was a huge sort of archival collection there of paper documents related to that. So it's not all about selling assets that are in a home. I come to it sort of with another eye, and no one else in the company has this eye. So I came to it with the sense of like, this has to be preserved. We're going to send it to the museum. Like, I'm just going to let the client know if they're on board with that. They were super excited about it. Again, it's like you said, being a steward, it's if you have a museum background, you at least know how to identify sort of things of importance versus everyday objects. So I always like that story and telling people that story just because, I'm still stewarding things and material. It's just happening in a different way.
It belongs in a museum.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I scream sometimes. So I'm not.
I was thinking it.
People
Yes.
are like, "What are you talking about?" I'm like, I think this actually does.
Yeah. Yeah. You're like, yeah. Watch Indiana Jones and then we'll talk.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Again, another influential piece of media in my early life. So
Oh my God.
that Antiques
Same.
Roadshow, I'm a huge National Treasure fan.
Same.
That's another. I
Uh-huh.
feel like that's a generation after Indiana Jones, but that's a very American history focused, like Indiana Jones take. I love that movie. It just over the top for me, but yeah,
In the best way, though.
yes,
My God. Well, Ryan, thank you so much. And now I want to go watch National Treasure and Indiana
yes,
Jones. Indiana
perfect.
Jones was like one of my first crushes, so that like tells you everything you need to know
Yep,
about me. Well, thank you so much, Ryan. And
no
if
problem.
people want to get in touch with you or learn more about you and Poof, what's the best way for them to do that?
Honestly, for me, it would be LinkedIn. So you can just search my name on LinkedIn and you can reach out via that. For Poof, you can just go to our Instagram. We have a huge Instagram presence. Again, not to plug our services, but we do sell things online. So if you're watching this in California and see something at our sale that has a little barcode on it, that means you can buy it online. Just go to our website and purchase it and I'll ship it to you. But
My
yeah,
God.
social media, LinkedIn and Instagram. So
Sweet.
yep.
I'm going to have to go check that out.
I think we got a
Yeah.
lot of people that like to thrift and buy things secondhand in the
Yes.
museum community and loves antiques and all that.
Yeah, we need to be promoting it even more than we already are. So
Yes, absolutely.
but yeah, thank you so much again
Yes.
for having me. I really appreciate, again, having this outlet. I'm hoping, someone resonates with, what I've been saying. And again, I'm always for, communicating with someone who, again, has any more questions. I'm pretty much an open book. I don't really, again, hide my experience. I sort of own it. So
Yeah.
yeah,
You're going to help
Yeah.
a lot of people with this conversation, let me tell you.
yeah,
Even
I love
resonating
that.
just with little of me. So
Yeah, I love to hear it. And that's, yeah, it's awesome. And yeah, again, this is a great platform that you guys have going on.
Thank
Thank
you. We
you.
appreciate it,
Yeah,
Ryan.
no
We
problem.
appreciate your time. Thanks for tuning in to Curate Your Career. We hope today's episode gave you some ideas, encouragement, or at least a little bit of sanity for your museum career journey.
If you love what you heard, the best way to support us is to subscribe, leave a review, or share this episode with a fellow museum professional who might need it.
And don't forget, you can connect with us, send questions, or share your story at curateyourcareerpod@gmail.com or find us on Instagram at Curate Your Career Podcast. Don't forget to fill out our mailbag form and share your questions that might be featured on a future episode.
All right, now go take one small action toward the career you actually want. So don't just survive your museum job, curate it one step at a time.